Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from in the country, and welcome to the Getting Started webinar. I see the participant numbers are climbing at a very fast and steady rate at the moment. So I'm going to give that just a second to slow down, because I know we have quite a few people who are planning on joining us today. But we're really excited to be able to join you and walk through what we've termed our Getting Started guide. And the Interagency Working Group, one of the key components that we've learned over the first 3 years of our work is that every community has a different story. Every community has a different level of experience in navigating economic transitions or transformations. Every community needs a different set of resources and tools to keep moving forward in economic revitalization, economic diversification, and particularly around the energy transition and energy transformations occurring around the country. And so today we're going to spend some time specifically on one of these tools called the Getting Started Guide. And so if we go next to the slide, I want to walk through a little bit of housekeeping items. The first, all of the attendees, you are muted. It helps us keep things on track. But we want to hear from you. This is not a one-sided conversation. This is a conversation with communities. I'm sure we have community leaders on here. We have community members, even state leaders, and federal and county partners as well. And so what we want to do is have, if there's any questions or comments, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. That Q&A button, you can ask questions of me, of our panelists, as we go along. And then also all the slides, the webinar recording, everything will be at energycommunities.gov. And if you registered here, you will also be sent these via email. If you do need technical assistance with any problems on Zoom, do that in the chat to host. But again, keep the Q&A clean for questions and answers, because we want this to be interactive. All right, next slide. So first, we're in the welcome. I'm going to wrap up here in a few seconds. And I'm going to pass it over to Cindy Wendland to get us an overview of the Getting Started Guide. And then we have some conversations around some specific communities and the stories there. Thank you, Chris Pastors from the Economic Development Director in Navajo County, Arizona, for joining us, and for Kathy Brown out of Peoria, Illinois. Really looking forward to hearing your comments. And then Cindy's going to be leading a discussion with speakers and have some opportunity to interact through that with the question and answers. And to set the stage on the next slide, to set the stage of this this particular webinar, this tool, the Getting Started Guide, communities told us they need a bunch of different things. We had a request for information, and we've interacted with 12,000 or more. I don't know, maybe it's 20,000 individuals in energy communities all across the country. You need infrastructure, you need housing, revitalized manufacturing, workforce training and development, access to federal funding, and capacity building. And within that, what we're trying to build is a whole set of tools, all the way from rapid response teams. If you go to the next slide, from a landing page, a clearinghouse at energycommunities.gov, where you can find all kinds of federal resources, the Getting Started Guide here today, other types of resources, success stories, models you can build off of in your community, a navigator function where if you can't find the type of contact or the contacts or the resources within all of our 11 federal agencies, you can contact the navigator. We have tax credit maps. And so we're trying to create the types of resources, everything from our rapid response teams that have people with boots on the ground to our events around the country, to a Getting Started Guide and the success stories and models. And so I'm really happy to hand this over to Cindy Wendland today to give us an overview of this Getting Started Guide. So Cindy, great partner on this team, and lots more experience in working in communities in transition than me. So Cindy Wendland, I'll hand it to you.
Great, thanks very much, Brian. So let's take a few minutes. This is as Brian mentioned, this is a step-by-step guide intended to help communities and workers start the process of planning or responding to economic or social changes, primarily resulting from the energy transition, but really from any economic shift. So it's a planning and action tool for community leaders, volunteers. It's also a guide to help communities and other eligible entities access federal funds to address economic resiliency. The guide has 10 steps divided into the categories of planning, executing, and managing. And it's designed to be both a roadmap and a reference. So as a roadmap, it's meant for communities that are just starting to plan, either in anticipation of an impending closure or for something that's already happened. As a reference, it lets you access multiple resources while you're writing a grant, updating your SEDS, turning a project over to new staff. And there's multiple types of resources, and we'll touch on those as we go through it. There's also examples, plans, guides, things from federal agencies and NGOs that we want to lift up. Much of it's education around grant writing, and we endeavor to help you access federal funds, but it's also intended to offer a rabbit hole of sorts for those who want to focus on improving their community, or they want to focus on a specific area. So each section has some discussion that explains and provides advice on how to achieve each step. And it's written from a planner's perspective, and it's meant to be a logical progression if you're starting from scratch. The process of planning is important. So even if it doesn't result in applying for funds, economic and diversification happen in many ways, and most often in small increments. So use it as it applies to your situation. The Energy Communities IWG website, as Brian mentioned, is just full of resources for funding, technical assistance, both competitive and free, and educational resources. So be sure to take a look around. And finally, there's a glossary, including acronyms, and we know those are pretty plentiful in the federal government. So let's walk around the document a bit, section by section, where I'll highlight different resources in the guide. So first, there's best practices included throughout. Sooner you start, the better the outcomes. But having said that, it's never too late to plan for change. While this is a guide for you to create your community's plan or envision your future, there's no need to reinvent. If you find another good idea, an organizational structure, anything worth starting with or duplicating, do it. And this is true with grant writing as well. If there's a good format or an argument for a grant, use it. Eventually, we'd like to include grant application templates with the operative questions to answer and potential sources of information that might save you time and effort if you're writing a grant. And we agree that it is not easy, and we applaud agencies' efforts to improve access. So each section includes examples of places to find information and examples of other plans that address this stage. Some are very specific, like the DOE Energy Transition Playbook, and others offer a much more general approach to planning. The objective is to make progress toward your needs. So forming a team is not only leadership, but it's the community as a whole. So whatever you do will be more successful, sustainable, and hopefully a springboard if there's general community consensus behind it. Just like engagement, don't choose a team by looking in the mirror. The team needs to reflect the people who represent the entire community, including people who have been the naysayers. Complainers can become advocates for change with some exposure to the situation and learning how they can help. Work with decision makers, whomever they are, and here are some examples of regional approaches and the value of partnerships. Engage at a regional level. Those are usually the strongest applications. Federal agencies want to see the biggest impact for their investment. This is not only leveraging funds, but leveraging other projects, capacity building, and overall benefits to the community. Many communities only work with their own boundaries, within their own boundaries, but economies are bigger than municipal boundaries, and so partnerships add strength to communities overall. So here's some examples of worksheets. This is from the Prevention Institute on Effective Coalitions, and we won't go to these links. You can do that after this. It's accessible at any level of your project, and it begins a really good discussion of measuring success. So developing a strategy, I think we're one step ahead here. We should be on step 3. Very good, thank you. So this section focuses on engaging the community and setting goals. And we've tried to organize the guide in a logical way, as we said. So everything up until this point will help you set goals that will inform and direct your strategy. So authentic engagement is the foundation to promoting equity and setting realistic goals. And just like forming a team, engaging the community takes a lot of thought and effort. So identify ways to hear these voices. You can get creative with meetings, surveys, booths, at fairs, anywhere the community congregates physically or digitally. The guide also includes examples of SMART goals. You've probably heard of that, SMART, another acronym, as well as how these are used in other organizations. And measuring goals can be difficult, and particularly when they're qualitative. But those are also a good effort to make to show that whatever you intend to apply for also is going to have an outcome that you can track. So goals help set the strategy. And if you don't know all the details, people can't agree, all the usual things that go on in a community, establish some scenarios for future deliberation, but don't let the lack of consensus stop you from moving forward. And so here's some more examples down here. Yep. So EPA has a great public participation guide. DOE has another great playbook for strategy setting. The Just Transition Fund has some good goals measurement tactics in their blueprint. And so now moving on to a plan, the purpose of a plan, which is an extension of your strategy, is to create the story about your transition and the needs and the work that needs to be done. And it can be used as a narrative and a justification for your potential grant or for your community wellness overall. But keep it simple. It's hard enough to write a plan, to write a grant, to write. And so it doesn't have to be long or complicated. It does, however, have to be a public document adopted by the governing body in your community. So often an existing master plan or another kind of plan can be a good thing that you can actually amend to include some of the issues that you want to include in your grant, because you want to have a plan that supports your grant that says, we're here in the community, we've thought about these things, and now we're going to try and implement them by asking for some funding. However, these can be complicated and time consuming, we know that. And so a simpler approach can be writing a plan that takes the form of a resolution, which is really an annotated set of statements by the governing body, or as a simple standalone document. And many small municipalities in rural areas don't have staff to do this work, so be sure to solicit and accept help from others, like local colleges, philanthropies, and capable volunteers who can put the public input, goals, and the strategy into words. And so here are some examples of community action plans. Everything from that big glossy thing, if you're in an urban area, to a standard resolution that comes out of your governing body. Some are templates, some are more general community action plans, but as we mentioned earlier, feel free to copy. There's nothing wrong with that. So now working on the data. Getting the data you need to be able to support whatever you're asking for is really important. It's just as important to show that while you're asking for some specific funds, what are you asking for that will make it better? You need to defend what you're proposing. Here are the things we want to do. Here's why we think it's going to make it better. So data is more than numbers. It's more than just the census information. It's things like providing visuals, like taking pictures, showing infograms, graphics. All those things are important. Testimony can be data. Don't underestimate what happens to people, what the impact is on people. It's important to make your request about people, and we all know that when a community thrives, people thrive. So while this guide is a discussion and very much about finding and being awarded funding, getting the data to support your plan or your grant can also help to illuminate things that you didn't know about your community, or a new way to see it, or it can be a catalyst for other objectives, other solutions. So there's some great resources here, and you can see them all in the links. Some of the federal agencies also produce measures of distress, resiliency, financial viability, other things that are also data but are not typically found in some of the traditional data sources. Census does this, FEMA does it, the EPA does it. There's some other kinds of measurements like the ALICE, the Asset Limited Income Constrained Employment measures, which are a little bit different than poverty or distress. And just a note about distressed communities, and many grants are related and give priority points to energy communities and distressed communities, but the measurements are not always the same. So be sure and check those. So on to funding. You always want to talk about money. Most grants only fund project-based work, and they won't fund operations. And we've included some tips and tools to find other funding from community foundations, from philanthropy, academia, local experts, even volunteers. So this text box here that we call the tough truth, it's there for a reason. Application costs, cost share, matching funds, pre-application costs can be a deal breaker, and we get that. It's expensive, especially if you're doing something that involves construction when you have to get engineering and plans and make cost estimates. We understand that. The good news is that there's some flexibility and in some programs based on the level of distress or just having energy community status. Many agencies offer free technical assistance to help assess issues, determine feasibility, plan for construction, justify your needs, but they will not write your grant. So when pen goes to paper, not happening. Some funding options are community foundations that often can fund grant writing or cost share. Philanthropy also plays a role in this. One example is the Just Transition Fund, which has a federal access center, and they may participate in several levels of assistance. Increasingly, states are also providing grant writing and matching assistance now through legislated offices and funds. Minnesota, Kentucky, New York, New Mexico, those are all examples. Some academic institutions have programs like the University of Michigan Economic Growth Institute, University of Minnesota Extension, the Arizona State University Just Energy Transition Center. They all have offices that can contribute to your efforts in some way. And for those of you writing brownfield grants, there's technical assistance to brownfield offices that are free through the EPA. So preparing your application. This is putting it all into the term paper of sorts, which is grant writing. So spend some time learning how to write a successful grant, and you may want to contact other communities that have been successful receiving federal funds or similar projects to hear about their experiences or their lessons learned. Agencies publish their awards. They don't publish the applications, but many communities will share them with you. How, what did we write for our statement of purpose? How did we manage these forms, those forms, even hints on how to use grants.gov. So step 7 here has links that will walk you through every step. And you can see there are steps, and the federal system is all online now, except in very rare instances where you can still submit on paper. But it has some functionality that takes some time to learn. So it's a good idea to make sure to speak to your point of contact, who is listed in every notice of funding opportunity that's on this website. And be sure to take advantage of any agency-specific training. Ask your point of contact for guidance. In some cases, they'll even review a draft application. And again, while no agency will assist in writing your grant, most can help you ensure that the application is focused on the funding and that it's complete. So they really are here to help you succeed. So on to implementation and managing. We've combined these two things because, as I mentioned earlier, if you're doing any kind of construction, the sticks and bricks we call it, it's very different at the implementation stage, and it's no small feat to manage a construction project. And because of that, we have fewer examples regarding implementation. However, with respect to managing, if you are awarded a grant, the granting agency will provide you with management training. We'll also note that it's often as much effort to write the grant and win the grant as it is effort to manage it over the course of the cooperative agreement. And I see Chris nodding his head. However, there are even philanthropies who will actually pay to help you manage it, maybe provide accountants, maybe provide other kinds of support. In this section, we've also included some reflective questions to help you learn from your experience, along with more examples, lots of examples. As I mentioned, it's a little bit of a rabbit hole on purpose. And finally, on to success stories. We really want to know about your successes so that we can both applaud them and learn from them. And we have a whole raft of them here on the website. However, reading about other people's successes is also useful because it inspires ideas. And these can be current or previous projects, doesn't really matter, federally funded or a combination of public and private funds. And we really want to encourage people by showing them that there are ways to knit together all forms of funding, expertise, assistance, and passion for something in very different ways. So we've gotten some great input on this guide to date. This is our version 1, and we have a whole slew of things that we'd like to add to it. However, while we really appreciate everybody's contribution to this work and critiques and employing it in their community, and it's fairly new, we've just launched it this past fall, it is a work in progress, and it would be most helpful to us if we learn what works for you and what doesn't. Let us know what you'd like to see in the guide and where we can do better, because we really want you to get started. So thanks very much. And at this stage, why don't we move to a discussion with Chris Pastors and Kathy Brown, both of whom are professional planners playing different roles in energy transition communities. And they can share their experiences planning, grant writing, and being local leaders. We will put their bios in the chat so that we preserve time to learn from them. And so I want to welcome both Chris and Kathy to the discussion. And just keep in mind, we will have time for question and answer after we have this discussion with both. So keep those coming, and you can see there's a Q&A section here for you to put those in. So let's start with you, Chris. Tell us a little bit about what you do in your communities and how transition is happening.
Thank you, Cindy. Chris Pastors here, and I work in Navajo County. So if you think of the Four Corners area, we are in that southwest corner of Arizona. So that kind of helps those that are here to think about the desert area, the Four Corners area, northeast Arizona is what we call it. And if we could go to the next slide, I think that'll start to show a little bit of kind of our demographics. So very, very rural region. And we realize that we can't do this on our own. I mean, we've got a region that is the size of Virginia. And then when you kind of look at the way that we're broken down as far as land ownership, you know, about 60% of our land is sovereign tribal nations. We've got a lot of federal land, and we've got a little bit of a privately owned land. But when it comes down to this, what we realized in our region that we're going to be going through an economic transition over the next few decades. It's already begun. We've had a coal plant close. We've had a couple mines that fed that coal plant close, and we've got 3 more coal-fired generating stations that are looking to close. One next year, and one, or the other 2 are going to be within the decade. So if we can go to the next slide too, I want to show you us on a map so you can see how we kind of piece together. But what's unique about the situation is we realized that individually we couldn't take on this transitional change on our own. And so the 3 counties in northeast Arizona, and that's what you're looking at here is the northeast Arizona. So up in the right-hand corner, that's the Four Corners where Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, Arizona meet. We came together and we says, all right, we need to figure out a regional strategy. We need to get started on this, because if we don't do this lift as a 3-county region, we're going to leave it up to all our individual towns to go at it on their own. And so about a year ago, we applied for an EDA grant, and we actually got some coaches awarded to us. And this was through NACO, the National Associations of Counties. They awarded us a technical assistance grant to get started with our strategy. And so about 12 months ago, we started meeting as the 3 counties to come up with a regional strategy that encompassed all of our partners. And when I'm talking all of our partners, we've got about 50 census designated spots. So we've got about 25 small communities that are incorporated. We've also got we've got 7 tribal sovereign tribal nations that reside in this northeast corner. So if we can go to the next slide, I want to talk about what we've come up with. So a year ago, we started on our diversification plan for these 3 counties, and what you're seeing here is an executive summary. So this is only 2 pages. I just kind of splayed it out so you guys can see, but there's a lot of pieces that in here that are exactly related to the Get Started plan. Now, we wish we had the Get Started plan, but luckily we had some coaches that were working through a methodology that was very similar to what Cindy just laid out. One of the things that we found as we're developing our strategy is, shoot, a lot of our communities need this as well. So we actually incorporated this Get Started plan into our regional transition strategy. So our regional transition strategy, kind of simple. We've got 5 strategies that we're looking at: coal capacity, infrastructure, expansion, community quality, workforce. So you can kind of see those there in the middle. But really, we needed a binder, because we've got all of these geographically isolated communities. And when I say geographically isolated communities, if I want to have a meeting up in the north part, and I'm invited to a meeting, I get up at 4 and I get in the car at 4:30 in the morning, and I drive for 4.5 hours north to get to a meeting at 11 o'clock. And then have the meeting for a few hours, and then it's 4.5 hours back. That's just part of our geography. But really, when we're meeting in these geographically isolated places, what we found is we need simple language that binds us. So I was talking about this binder. So one of the things that we utilized is the understanding of the game of baseball. So base hits win games. If we're going to advance as a community, we need base hits. We don't need grand slams. We aren't going to chase the home runs, because those aren't necessarily what's important to the community. But these base hit projects that create, small wins in the community, a few jobs here, some housing here, some infrastructure improvements here. While in the big scheme of things, it doesn't look like a home run, that's not what we're chasing. We're chasing something that is important to the communities, and those look like base hits. And so that's why you're kind of seeing a little bit of this baseball terminology of getting on base. But really, what I wanted to share with you, and what everybody's here for, is this getting started guide. So if we can go to the next stage, I wanted to talk a little bit in terms of the experience, how this fits in. So our coal transition capacity. Now, this is about the communities being able to do this work themselves. Everybody's got 5 jobs. And I know that the participants here, they probably wear 3, 4, 5 hats as well. And so when it comes to applying or getting your project ready for application, that is a big challenge for small communities. And so we've identified this in our coal transition capacity strategy. And this is where we've been using this Get Started guide. And so in using this Get Started guide, I'm going to share a little example, because really this is for the communities that need it most, right? So I get invited to go visit 4 chapters up in the Navajo Nation. And when you go up there, I want to kind of paint a picture of how this Get Started guide actually gets into the hands up there. So as soon as you start driving, it's a 4.5 hour drive, as I was saying. About an hour and a half into the drive, your cell phone stops working, so there's no cell service. Your GPS map goes blank, and you're just a little blue dot on the screen. And as you're driving up, you normally, if you're engaging with these local communities, you're not going to you need a kind of a handwritten map to get there, or somebody to take you out there. And that's what happened in my case. And so we arrive out there at the chapter houses, and everybody's driven, they know which roads are blocked, because during the winter, some are too muddy. So they're like, don't take that road, take this road. And the locals know how to get around, and they're willing to make those efforts. But when we get to the chapter house and we're talking about applying for grants, because everybody has a project, sometimes they don't have their idea formed. And so when we get to these chapter houses, it is good. There's a presentation. We've got electricity there and some internet, but it's localized. And so when we actually sit down and start talking about how do we get these projects advanced or get these projects on base, sometimes they just have an idea. And I said, okay, the idea is great. Now what we need to do about that is we need to form a project around that idea. And so when I travel, I actually print out this Get Started guide, and I'll bring about 40 copies of it printed in color. And so when I'm showing it on the screen, people can see that link and that, they'll take it and they'll save it in their cell phone. But oftentimes what the challenge is that's their only tool for viewing the Get Started guide. So yes, they've got the link on their phone. They've got that saved for when they do have cell reception, right? But giving them the Get Started guide in their hand makes it tangible. And what it also does too is it takes out the intimidation factor, because sometimes you get lost in 1,000 clicks and it starts to becoming overwhelming. But so what we've been able to do is, start with the project idea and then start working through those steps, right? And kind of starting to flesh out those, and they can see the tools, the resources that are available as we work through it. So I want to kind of stress that having this Get Started guide, there's nothing else like this. We wish we had this when we were building our own regional strategy. It was so important that we actually built it into our strategy as a tool. But I wanted to take you into the Northeast Arizona, into the Four Corners area, on how we are using that Get Started guide. So I'm going to just pause it there to transition, and you'll hear a little bit more from us. But I wanted to let you know how we are using the Get Started guide in Northeast Arizona, Four Corners area. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. That's really great insight, particularly about, access and the importance of when we put all these links in, that they're very difficult to use. And you'll notice that most of them the hyperlinks haven't been changed into something that, is a nice statement. Tried to put them in exactly for that reason, but that's a major issue, and thanks very much for that. So let's turn to Kathy now. And as we mentioned, Kathy is in Central Illinois, and we'll talk a little bit more about their experience.
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks for this opportunity to share a little bit about the Greater Peoria region. So as you can see from this slide, that our Economic Development Council serves 5 counties right in the center of Illinois. We are one of the downstate's larger metropolitan areas. I know when anyone thinks of Illinois, they think of Chicago. The next slide really tells the story in terms of how diverse we are, though. We were shaped, our economy is really shaped by transportation networks that you see there. River, road, and rail are a big part of our regional economy. And it really tells the story of why that industry developed within our region. We're not only a heavy manufacturing area, but we also have some of the most abundant farmland in the nation surrounding our region. That topography makes it a beautiful countryside to live in as well. So one important note, if you're not familiar with this, our configuration of counties. I think those geopolitical boundaries are always challenging in our work, but this economic development district is defined by the EDA. So we are in a custom of working regionally in terms of planning. And the next slide kind of gives that story that illustrates the points that Cindy has put in the guide so well. I think the really challenging part of us, for all of us in getting started in planning, is forming that partnership and that team. And we really have to think as diversely as possible. And this is a long list of very diverse partners representing both the economic quality of life leaders within our region. The importance of those government-placed leaders are important, but it's also important that we know who are the thought leaders in our region and find ways to bring them to the table. One of the points that we made in talking about this, I think that section of really thinking up front who you're going to involve in the planning sets the stage for your success. And so too often, and I know I'm guilty of this, that I'm just thrilled when I get someone that says yes. And what I need to be doing, always in putting that planning team together, is asking myself who's missing. And have I really done the kind of assessment that's important to identifying the right leaders to help shape this overall vision for the region. The other point I think that I wanted to bring out in what happens in planning that could be helpful as a step to be added to the guide. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, is planning always involves looking at what's already been done. You know, so in addition to discovering who your leadership base needs to be within your region, it's really important to pull out those past documents and to see what was achieved, what kind of goals were set, because the community likes to see that something happened as a result of a planning effort. It gives you kind of a baseline to build from. And so this is our last SEDS document that was turned into the EDA, was called the Big Table. And we regularly have convenings to update those conversations. And we're just getting ready to go into our next 5-year SEDS updating planning process, and have been accepted into the BREC challenge process, which we're really excited about, because I think that that will be really helpful to us in updating our SEDS as well. So the next slide talks a little bit of what that partnership did for us in the planning process. And, you know, the resources that are provided in the guide are really helpful in terms of thinking about, but you have, in addition to defining who's your leadership team, you know, another really important part of your planning activities is how you're going to engage the public. And a great deal of time and energy goes into setting the stage for those conversations. And in this planning process, we visited, you know, all 5 counties, hosted in-person events that were just kind of open table discussions where they brought forward their issues and concerns. And then the planning team had the task of processing that information and ultimately putting it back into goal setting. Phenomenal attendance, but I think I really take that back to the leadership that's involved and how important bringing those partners to the table are in making that work happen. So the next challenge, I feel like, in terms of planning, and the next slide begins to illustrate that. This is kind of a busy slide, but it really speaks to the importance of data and information and planning. And in our region, we've used a couple of strategies that I think are worth noting and important for your consideration. We have sought technical assistance grants from the Economic Development Administration, and those technical assistance grants have funded labor shed studies and targeted industry studies that really help us to build strategies around particular workforce areas for our entire region. When you look at this chart, this is not Peoria, you know, it's not one community, and we chose to tackle this issue in a big region, even beyond the Economic Development District region. We chose 10 counties. And the reason that we looked at this industry analysis in that big swath is because that's truly our labor shed. If you look at any of our employers within the region, it's not at all uncommon to have workers drive 45 minutes to an hour. So, you know, we really need to be able to gather that data and information from a broad swath. The other value in taking that bigger picture view is this correlated really nicely in terms of data for our community college board. And so they were able to take this labor shed study and begin to look at where they wanted to invest in terms of new training and opportunities. So data is a really critical piece. The other technique that we've used a lot is to pursue partnerships with the University Planning Department. And so University of Illinois Department of Urban and Regional Planning has been a key partner in many of our regional planning efforts in helping to do that data research piece, because crunching those numbers is one of those many hats or challenging tasks that we have. The next slide again highlights the importance of partnerships. And this slide was created by Prairie Rivers Network in Illinois. And so, really being able to not only see those trends that are local, kind of regional, but we've got to be able to see those trends that are happening at a state and national level as well. And so just emphasizing, engagement of those external partners to help us see that big picture and to really think more broadly about those issues that we're facing. My final slide, I think that Chris kind of spoke to this, and in really a big part of our quest in planning always is to make something happen. You want to see some change. And so if you can, in that planning process, either while you're embedded in it or as soon as you're finished, pick something that's going to be visible and really help to build a momentum in the community around action and show the benefits of planning, because you're going to have huge investments of time on the part of many volunteers. We're right now wrapping up a comprehensive land use plan for a community, and already they're talking about, here's the first thing we want to do. And that'll be something that will be visible to the community within 6 months of, kind of completing that comprehensive land use plan. I think the other piece that I feel like is really important in kind of generating ideas is, I feel like part of my job responsibilities within the region, but no, always I need to look broader, is that we need to be constantly learning and discovering what strategies and tools that are working in other communities that support development. And so if we can build that kind of resource into the guide. And then my final point, I think that we've talked about throughout, is that we just have to stay connected to those regional, state, and federal resources for support. Knowing our local assets and opportunities is very important, but those external partners can be really great tools to help create the change that we want to see. So thanks for the opportunity. A wonderful tool, just a really wonderful tool that can help to shape those local conversations.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And I'm taking notes here. So just to sum up a little bit before we go to the Q&A, making the point here about the small wins, the base hits, and how important that is as inspiration, but also because things don't happen in big swaths in general, is important. We talked about also making the guide paper friendly and recognizing that a lot of people aren't going to be able to use it digitally. The other thing too is looking at showing successes through your past documents. We had a plan, we did these things, now we're moving forward. That's important, that people also need to be lifted up, that this is a big effort, but look at the progress we've made so far. Including strategies and tools that are working. So some more on the ground kinds of things with examples. And I know that, we've worked closely with the EPA, and they have some pretty amazing things that I think that we can include in here. I don't know, a lot of people know that the EPA has a whole community department outside of their normal environmental work, but it's in service to environmental health, but it's pretty amazing. Watching for big trends, watching for the big picture, understanding what's happening in the future, because a lot of times, the bombshell is that this thing is happening, our plant's closing, we're losing jobs, our tax base is going away. And those are all huge issues, but also looking at the big picture in the future and how can we plan for that. And then the importance of data. And that was a great example, Kathy, with the labor shed analysis. Let's jump into our Q&A now. There's a few things that I'll say first off, that if you have a specific question about a funding opportunity and whether you're eligible for that, we will absolutely send that off to our navigator team, because that's their specialty. And so we won't spend time on that today. Then there's I'll just go through these. There's a question about, is there a cohort of Wyoming folks involved in this effort? I will say that we have a rapid response team. The interagency working group has a rapid response team in Wyoming. And so to that extent that they are involved in the effort, but not specifically in developing the guide. Another question, is it feasible to focus on engaging with local communities about their repower sites for decarbonizing power production within energy communities? And this is a subset. Certainly you can use the guide to focus on anything, no matter how narrow or how broad. And we've written it in a pretty broad way, but absolutely, honing in on something specific is a good idea. Again, it's probably a little bit bigger than a base hit. It might be a triple, not sure. I see this question, Mr. Leslie. I think that we're going to send that one to our navigator because it's very specific. Then we have a question about, so many grants are reimbursable, requiring the ability to cash flow a project. Can you speak to resources for acquiring working capital? Well, I'll offer a little bit and then turn it over to Chris and Kathy to add in. I know that some of the working capital I've seen in the past has been through funding at brownfield authorities, through revolving loan funds. And there are revolving loan funds available through both the EPA and brownfields, and also through EDA, where you can establish your own. Sometimes TIFs, tax increment financing districts, have funding that they're willing to use for capital to float. More often than not, I see general funds, and then occasionally philanthropy will do that. But Chris, Kathy, do you have examples that we might be able to?
Sure. I think when it comes down to that cash flowing of projects, that's always a challenge. And so one of the ways that our communities are working on that cash flowing of awarded projects is, there's kind of two parts to it. One is, first, getting the grant usually requires a match, right? And so you've got to have some match, whether it be in kind or financial. But I would encourage the panelists in this meeting here to look at their local private industry partners. So in our 3-county region, we've actually had the 3 utility suppliers, the main guys that are very vested in this community. And they have actually created a utilities grant that's available. And it's a very simple process of applying for it, up to $25,000. So these utilities are partners in our regional transition strategy. So Arizona Public Service, Tucson Electric Power, and then also Salt River Project. And so they have a funding mechanism at that front end for helping to have real cash for a grant project, not in kind, not shared work, but also when it comes to funding some of these projects that are reimbursable. I think it's always worth it to ask, and I've used this trick before. Even though a USDA grant may be reimbursable, that's the way they want to do it, there is mechanisms for asking it for advances, but you've got to be very specific in terms of saying, this is the invoice, this is the service, these are the products we're going to get. But working with those agencies, because the agencies that are awarding these grants want to see the project proceed, and they understand that, a $150,000 general fund, that's reimbursed in 3 months might not be stomachable. So I think that my advice would be to be working with those agency grant program coordinators, whoever is in charge of that, and getting really clear on advance mechanisms, right? what is it I need to prove in order to have an advance to pay for those services or those projects in order to see the project move forward. So that's in my experience how we've been able to kind of work through some of those cash constraints for operating a project.
I would just add that, I think that is part of your grant planning too, is, to really look at that cash flow and understanding how you're going to meet that. And we have companies that are passing on grants right now because of that reimbursement timeline, broadband in particular, depending on how the grant is structured. Illinois has implemented a new policy where they have found a way to provide that matching fund for federal grants. And so, knowing that you have a strong match up front is a good way to kind of cash flow that and make sure that the reimbursement is going to be on schedule. I think the other trend that we're seeing in the community at the community level is development of a new terminology to me, but I think it's been around for a while, but business development districts, and they're generating revenue based on sales tax. And that becomes a pretty fluid revenue stream for a lot of even our really small communities. And so it gives them a mechanism to have funds available to invest in projects.
Great, thank you. All good advice. Couple other questions. Is there a way to get a whole state involved in a planning activity that produces results? Would it be better to limit it to several counties? Well, I think a lot of that would depend on what the structure is for economic development in your state right now, as well as the regional support that you might get in an existing economic development district, for instance, which are subsets, for lack of a better term, of the Economic Development Administration. Anything to add, Chris, Kathy?
I would just say that I don't know if this is exactly what they're thinking, but Illinois has been taking the approach of, instead of having everybody compete for federal funds, that they've done like an internal bidding process, like submit your ideas and then we'll back to. And that seems to be working. I mean, we've gotten 2 tech hub designations in the state of Illinois using that kind of an approach. So statewide identification of priorities happened in that process. So I think it's probably an and also strategy, right? Like you still need that regional piece, but there are opportunities to set statewide priorities that need to happen.
And just on that, I think depending on your state, some states have energy transition centers, right, that are state funded. Arizona is looking at developing one of those. But I think that some of the states are not necessarily working across the board. They're working on their population centers. And that's where the state priorities often will go. So in our region, we do have links to the state, but those are still forming. I think if your state did have an energy transition office, that would be an excellent place to start with these planning, because then you've got that state buy-in from the get-go. And then you're working your communities into it. So I think that's if we were able to start now, that's where we would start, as well as looking at that governor authorized state body for the entire state planning. So really good question.
And then we have 2 other questions, and then I think we'll have to stop at that from a time standpoint. Does the IWG plan to deploy more of these webinars on a more regional basis with regional local partners? Well, certainly it's being recorded, so the rapid response teams are certainly able to use these. Anybody can use this, and we'd encourage you to go ahead and do that. And then the last one are, what are the best federal sources to help with planning just transition? Does the rapid response, I think that's what our offer assistance. Well, I'll tell you, there's a couple things. There are federal funds for planning. You do have to apply for them, but they're for planning. So you don't have to get, estimates of cost and that sort of thing. The EDA, probably Economic Development Administration, has the most robust that can get you on the road. There are others too. The rapid response teams do offer assistance, not necessarily sitting down and planning, but certainly getting you moving in the right direction. So I think we need to stop there. I see Brian has come back on the screen, and that's my cue for we're going to wrap this up. So I'll thank both Chris and Kathy one more time. It's been really, really helpful to have you and listen to what goes on in your communities, because that's where things really happen, as opposed to on the screen and in writing. So with that, Brian, maybe you can close us out.
Well, absolutely, and I want to thank the speakers in the conversation as well, and I lament also with Cindy that we run out of time in a 1 hour webinar, but this is a daily effort. It's a labor of love for the whole IWG team, for folks like Chris and Kathy, and for all of our agency partners. I see some other notes that have come in terms of rapid response teams. You can find some of the information on the website, and if you have specific questions, you can always go to the Navigator to find the contacts for the rapid response team, depending on where you are. And I think that there are some opportunities out there, like out of the Department of Energy, the community's local energy action plan, and lots of different technical assistance and planning funds that we want to get you in contact with. So the easiest thing is contact us, contact our Navigator. We can put you in the right conversation. To look forward in some upcoming events, we are going to be in the Intermountain West in Golden, Colorado, discussing a specific provision of the Inflation Reduction Act called 48C. This is a manufacturing tax credit. It's really a cornerstone in how, as we transition the energy system and create a lot more manufacturing opportunities in the clean energy manufacturing space in the United States, we need to drive $4 billion of federal tax incentives. That's $12 billion of new investment in the clean energy manufacturing space into energy communities. And so to do that, we're having a series of events like the Intermountain West event in a couple of weeks. A week after that in Central Appalachia, the Illinois Basin in Evansville, Indiana in April, and keep your eyes peeled for more and more events as we roll this out. There is a webinar tentatively next week on March 14th around federal funding specific in the Department of Energy and the manufacturing energy supply chain and other offices within the Department of Energy. And then again, keep going to the next slide, as we're already at the top of the hour. There is ways to get contact. You can find the Getting Started guide here at this QR link or at energycommunities.gov. We've mentioned the Navigator function, where we will answer your call. We will answer your emails if you have questions about where to find resources or contacts within a rapid response team. So you can contact the Navigator services. And then at last, I want to thank everyone for staying in communication with us. That there's always a call to action for us. Stay in communication, give us success stories, give us your challenges. We want to find the ways that we and the federal government, the 11 agencies of the Interagency Working Group, can put all of our resources together for your benefit. So please stay in contact with us. You can again contact us at contact@energycommunities.gov or contact me at executive-director@energycommunities.gov. We want to hear directly from you. And again, you can follow us on social media and the website. But all of this, I noticed there's some questions about, there will be a recording of this that'll be posted, and we want to stay in contact with you in the transition. The Getting Started guide is just one of the great tools that the team has built. And so thank you all for your attention today, and good luck and have a great day.